Aria Wells stood at the edge of the artificial gravity field, her breath shallow as she stared across the sprawling training arena of the Intergalactic Defense Academy. Silver domes shimmered under the two suns of Solarian Prime, casting sharp reflections across the obstacle courses where cadets from dozens of alien species dashed, leapt, flew, and roared their way through the final stages of physical evaluation. Aria felt small in comparison, not just in stature, but in presence. While others soared through the gravity-modulated platforms, she remained grounded, both physically and emotionally. She had always known that the physical trials would be her greatest challenge. From the moment she arrived, she had felt the eyes on her, eyes belonging to clawed, scaled, armored, and exoskeletal beings whose species evolved under harsher, deadlier conditions than Earth. Compared to the sharp-fanged Carnix warriors or the four-armed Gelthians who could climb vertical walls in seconds, she was painfully human. No natural claws, no reinforced bones, no metabolic accelerators, just flesh, sweat, and a stubborn will. Still, she had trained for this. For months before her departure from Earth, she had run drills in augmented gravity, subjected herself to high-altitude simulation, and trained in low-oxygen environments. She hadn't expected to dominate. She had only hoped to meet the minimum. But reality was unkind. Aria's failure was not dramatic, but it was definitive. On the second day of trials, she tripped during a zero-G leap, tumbling through the air before hitting a platform awkwardly and dislocating her shoulder. She had tried to reset it herself, gritting her teeth against the pain, but by then the timer had expired. A Carnix cadet had barked laughter as two drone medics escorted her out of the course. She remembered his words clearly. "Send the pink skin home. She'll be safer sorting data." The final insult came that evening. While most cadets celebrated their scores in the atrium, she sat in the dim dormitory pod assigned to provisionals, clutching the digital rejection notice displayed on her tablet. It was short, impersonal, and delivered with the cold precision of a bureaucratic AI. Candidate Aria Wells. Result: physical trials, below standard threshold. Classification: non-combatant. Assignment: logistics and maintenance support unit, Deck D9. No explanation, no encouragement, no acknowledgement of her mental scores or psychological assessments, both of which she had aced. Just a swift redirection to a role she had never trained for: cleaning and logistics. Her dreams shattered, not with a scream, but with a quiet exhale. She leaned back against the pod wall, eyes closed, the hum of recycled air masking the distant sounds of laughter and celebration. She didn't cry. She had done that already, after the failed leap, after the Carnix cadet's mocking voice, after seeing her shoulder bruised and twisted. This time, she just stared blankly and let the weight of failure settle over her like a cold blanket. The next morning, she reported for duty as assigned. Deck D9 was a world away from the Academy's pristine upper levels. It smelled of coolant, ozone, and lubricants. Droids glided silently along designated rails, and holographic indicators blinked dimly through the misty corridors. She was given a utility jumpsuit, gloves, and a cleaning drone with outdated firmware. Her supervisor, an insectoid named Chiterral, barely glanced at her as he gestured toward a long list of maintenance tasks. "This area, clean. No errors. Use scanner. No interference with active systems," he chirped, his compound eyes flicking toward her briefly. "Report malfunction. Do not repair. That is for technician units." "Yes, sir," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You are human. I read file. Do not touch coolant tanks. Fragile organics are not optimal near them." Understood. And so began her new routine, silent, invisible, and thankless. While others attended tactical briefings or sparred in the arena, she scrubbed grime from plasma vents and cataloged malfunctioning hover pads. She was not a soldier, not a cadet, not even an engineer. She was a placeholder. Still, in those long, quiet hours, Aria's mind wandered. She observed everything. She mapped the decks in her head, memorizing pathways and blind spots. She studied drone movement patterns and kept mental notes of when the instructors accessed the restricted simulation chambers. Her curiosity refused to be extinguished. Whenever she passed the observation balconies overlooking the strategy classrooms, she paused just long enough to watch holographic battle simulations unfold, sometimes even timing herself mentally, wondering how she might have done it better. On her third week, she found herself cleaning the central simulation chamber at midnight. The room was usually locked and guarded, but tonight it had been left open, likely by mistake. She hesitated in the doorway. The central console blinked softly, unattended. Around her, the air shimmered faintly with residual energy from earlier tests. She stepped inside, heartbeat quickening. She wasn't supposed to be here. She knew that. One wrong move, and she could be demoted further, or ejected from the academy altogether. But something inside her pushed forward. Not recklessness, not pride, just that quiet, smoldering frustration that had been building in her ever since she had arrived. She approached the console. The interface flickered as she activated the primary terminal. The system recognized her presence but made no effort to block her. A glitch, perhaps, or a forgotten override left by a tired instructor. A list of simulation scenarios appeared, coded by difficulty, type, and clearance. Most were locked. One was not. Simulation number 117-A, planetary evacuation under hostile conditions. Clearance, open. Estimated duration, 60 minutes. She stared at it. Her finger hovered over the interface. One simulation, one chance. No one watching. She tapped, begin. The room transformed instantly. Holograms flared to life, surrounding her with chaos. Civilians panicking, cities in flames, enemy fleets converging, resource shortages, weather interference. Every second brought new data, new alerts, new problems. It was overwhelming, but to her, it was beautiful. She moved with focus, issuing orders through the simulation's AI command interface, rerouting evacuation lanes, disabling decoy satellites, rerouting power to planetary shields, sacrificing non-essential districts to buy time for medical convoys. She coordinated fighter squads, repurposed mining ships as armored transports, and launched a reverse ambush by timing the orbital debris fallout. Every move cost something, but she calculated faster than the AI could update risks. Time blurred. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. Then, silence. Simulation complete. Total time, 43 minutes. Civilian survival rate, 97%. Military losses, minimal. Enemy neutralization, 82%. Strategy efficiency score, 99.7%. New record. She stared at the display. For a moment, she thought it was an error. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since arriving on Solarian Prime. Her joy was short-lived. She quickly shut down the system, cleared her prints, and resumed her janitorial duties. But the damage, or rather, the discovery, had already been made. The following morning, in a brightly lit command chamber 4 levels above her, a group of stunned instructors gathered around a playback of Simulation 117-A. "Who ran this?" barked Commander Vrel, a reptilian officer with 20 years of combat experience. His voice was strained with disbelief. "It's a human," said one analyst slowly, zooming in on the figure in the center of the recording. "Aria Wells, Maintenance Division, failed physical trials." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Vrel muttered, "Get her up here. Now." But Aria didn't know that yet. For now, she returned to her bunk, unaware that the tide had shifted, and that the girl who was dismissed as too weak for war had just outmaneuvered every species in the galaxy. Aria stood on the elevator platform with a small data slate pressed to her chest, her heart still beating in strange patterns from the night before. The console had been left open. That was a fact. No one had asked her to engage with the system, but no one had stopped her either. She had erased the logs she could access, shut down the interface properly, and returned to her assigned routine without attracting attention. And yet, a nervous tick lingered in her fingers, a deep suspicion that something, somewhere, had noticed. When the platform reached Deck D9, she stepped off and took a slow breath. The maintenance tunnel ahead was humming with drone activity. She walked with purpose, scanning cooling nodes, logging minor overheating fluctuations, inspecting hull seals. Her hands moved with practiced familiarity, but her thoughts refused to stay quiet. She had played the simulation in her head 10 more times since then, revisiting each decision, wondering if she could have saved even more lives, shaved off more time, reduced more risk. At the far end of the tunnel, near an atmospheric regulator, she paused to run diagnostics. The blue screen lit up, displaying stable pressure levels, and she exhaled in relief, not because the machine was fine, but because she needed the silence. The only sound was the soft hiss of pressurized air cycling through the ducts. Then her earpiece crackled to life. The voice was dry and formal, male and unfamiliar. Aria Wells, report to Simulation Command on Level A-3. Immediate compliance required. Her body went rigid. She replayed the message twice, in disbelief. That level was off limits to support staff. She wasn't even authorized to use the elevators that accessed the A deck without an override. Her hand trembled as she pressed the comm button. "This is Aria Wells. I believe there's a mistake. I'm assigned to D9 maintenance and—" "No mistake," the voice cut in sharply. "You are expected. Simulation Command, A3. Proceed." The channel went dead. She stared at the comm for a moment longer, her instincts screaming with a blend of fear and excitement. She could run. She could pretend she never received the message, claim faulty transmission. But something deeper, an old, stubborn piece of her that had always hated being overlooked, begged her not to shrink now. She went. The upper elevators required security clearance, but as she approached, the wall panel flashed green before she could even swipe her card. Her identity was already logged into the system. The doors opened soundlessly. Inside, the light panels adjusted to a cool white, and the carriage began to ascend with a speed that made her ears pop. Level A-3 was starkly different from everything she knew. It wasn't just clean, it gleamed. Transparent corridors arched over controlled ecosystems, and every step felt like walking inside the mind of a machine. She was met by a protocol assistant, a silver bipedal drone with no face and a soft mechanical voice. "Follow." No further explanation. She followed it through the hallway, past polished glass rooms where simulations pulsed in silence. In one, an Urathi commander shouted orders in a mock battlefield. In another, an insectoid strategist mapped out hyperspace blockades. But none of them noticed her. No one turned. She felt like a ghost moving through a temple of giants. The assistant stopped outside a door marked Simulation Command, Observation Bay Theta. It opened without sound, revealing a large amphitheater filled with tiered consoles and projection domes. A dozen officers sat within, some in uniform, others in robes or neural link harnesses. At the center stood a tall man with dark blue skin, wearing the black and gold insignia of command authority. His eyes were like carved sapphires, unblinking and unnervingly still. "Wells," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient hum. "Step forward." She obeyed, each step measured, her breath shallow. He gestured toward the central platform, where a spherical hologram of her simulation floated, slowly rotating in glowing hues of red and green. Movement markers traced her decision tree, annotated with timestamps and survival estimates. She recognized her own virtual maneuvers, evacuation orders, shield deployment, emergency protocol activations. "This was you?" he asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "You accessed the system unauthorized." "I didn't intend to," she began, but he raised a hand, and she fell silent. "No matter. The outcome speaks for itself. You completed one of our elite officer simulations in record time. The AI did not assist. The system logged all decisions as yours, correct?" "Yes, sir." Another officer, a sharp-featured woman with copper cybernetic eyes, leaned forward. "Your record shows you failed physical qualification. You were placed in maintenance. You have no formal combat education." "I studied independently," she replied. "Earth has military archives going back centuries. I ran simulations on personal systems, historical strategies, adaptive AI models, predictive behavior mapping. You scored higher than Commander Vrel in the same scenario," the woman said flatly. The blue-skinned man's face remained unreadable. "We require proof it wasn't a fluke. You will repeat the simulation under observation. If you fail, you return to D-9. If you succeed..." He let the silence hang. "I accept," Arya said, before the words had fully left his mouth. She was escorted to a lower platform where the real simulation chamber waited. This one was more advanced than the console she had used before. Neural uplinks formed a curved harness above a command interface, and dozens of projection nodes lined the chamber walls. She stepped into the center, adjusted the headset, and let the magnetic clamps slide over her wrists. "Begin," the officer commanded. The world lit up again. This time, the scenario was different, more brutal. A planetary defense grid had already collapsed. Civilian ships were scattered. Enemy fleets blocked conventional exit vectors. No clear allies remained. The AI adversary adapted to her every move, but she was faster. She redirected energy from orbital cannons to blind enemy sensors. She falsified data streams to trick enemy scouts into firing on one another. She orchestrated a planetary collapse protocol to shatter a moon fragment and crash it into an enemy carrier. 52 minutes later, she stood alone in the chamber, shaking from the exertion. The simulation ended. Above her, the viewing room erupted into murmurs and stunned whispers. The blue-skinned commander tapped a button on his console. Her score appeared on the central display. Strategy efficiency score, 98.4%. AI override, detected, none. Cadet status, pending review. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You have no physical strength, no speed, no biological advantage," he said slowly, "but you see the whole battlefield. That makes you dangerous. That makes you valuable." Arya didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice not to tremble. "You will be reassigned," he continued. "Effective immediately. Tactical division. You will undergo formal training. You will be supervised. And if you continue to exceed expectations, I will ensure your influence reaches beyond this academy." He turned and walked away without waiting for her answer. The cybernetic officer approached her next. Her voice was softer. "Welcome to Command Protocol. Don't waste it." By the time Arya returned to her dorm, her bunk assignment had already been changed. The system no longer listed her under maintenance. Her old duties were gone. Her slate now displayed a new schedule: simulations, theory labs, neural mapping, decision tree modeling, and war history of the Great Convergence. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt seen, not for what her body could do, but for what her mind was capable of. And somewhere deep in the upper decks, a meeting had already begun about how to deal with the implications of a human outscoring the galaxy's finest. Arya adjusted the unfamiliar collar of her new uniform as she stood outside Simulation Arena 5. The fabric felt strange, too crisp, too ceremonial, but it signified her reassignment. She was no longer maintenance staff, no longer invisible. A small insignia on her shoulder displayed her provisional rank, Tactical Initiate. It was a title created for her, since no one knew where exactly to place a human who had bypassed all standard protocols. She wore it with silent pride, though her nerves churned. The doors slid open with a smooth hiss, and she stepped into a chamber pulsing with electric tension. Seated in a semicircle above the simulation floor were 6 high-ranking instructors, each representing a different species. To her left sat a towering Gelthian with translucent skin and 4 arms folded across his chest. Beside him, a Carnix officer sharpened his talons against his armor in deliberate rhythm. On the far right, a pale, statuesque Varelian floated an inch above her seat, eyes closed in a constant state of neural interfacing. Arya was the only one standing in the center. She knew what this was. It wasn't a trial. It was a challenge, a test born not from protocol, but from disbelief. Her previous results had stirred more than curiosity. They had triggered resentment, especially among those who believed warfare was the domain of evolved biology, not logic. She had stepped onto sacred ground, and now she had to prove that her presence wasn't an accident. Commander Vrel entered last, his scaled boots echoing across the metal floor. He carried a small data crystal, which he inserted into the simulation core. "This test is not from our archives," he said, his voice curt. "It was created this morning, designed by a cross-species panel. You have not seen it. It will not adapt to you. It is raw, unpredictable, and reflects conditions no species here has trained for. You will have 1 hour. No outside assistance, no rewinds." Arya nodded. The platform beneath her feet began to shift, panels retracting and rearranging to form a full immersion field. Light exploded around her, and in an instant, she stood inside a sprawling alien metropolis. The skies burned crimson. The simulation's world was mid-collapse. Buildings collapsed into clouds of ash and metal. Emergency signals blared in 6 dialects. Civilian clusters screamed and scattered beneath the shadow of unknown aerial threats, spiked, multi-winged craft swarming like hornets. Firestorms devoured districts. Transit systems failed. The planetary defense grid sputtered, its nodes blinking erratically, its comms choked by static interference. Arya accessed the control interface through the neural uplink and inhaled sharply. No leadership remained. The command hierarchy was fractured. Ground units operated independently with no tactical cohesion. Escape vectors were blocked. The orbital ring had been hacked and reprogrammed to fire upon its own surface installations. She didn't panic. First, she mapped chaos. Her fingers moved rapidly over the command interface, isolating zones of structural integrity and rerouting civilian flows toward underground tunnels. She ordered an immediate blackout on all upper-level comms, disabling the corrupted defense grid to halt further misfires. The simulation's AI threw new threats at her: gas ruptures in the east sector, seismic activity in the lower strata, enemy infiltration teams breaching the water supplies. She responded with brutal efficiency. Infiltrators were funneled toward pressure-sealed corridors, which she vented to vacuum. Civilian tunnels were booby-trapped with heat flares and holographic decoys. Enemy tracking algorithms were fed false data via localized echo transmitters she ordered reactivated from the old mining cores. Within 30 minutes, the death toll graph leveled. At minute 32, she pulled her most dangerous move. Arya rerouted auxiliary fusion lines through the core infrastructure of the orbital ring, initiating a self-destruct sequence she had no authority to use. The instructors above her leaned forward in alarm. That command was suicidal, but she wasn't finished. She initiated a controlled ejection of 3 orbital nodes at precise angles, calculated down to the second. The ring collapsed in a chain reaction, but instead of striking the planet, the debris formed a massive kinetic barrier in the upper atmosphere. Enemy ships collided with it in droves, unable to react fast enough to the sudden shift in gravity and vector distortion. The swarm faltered. Then she activated an old protocol she had read about in an Earth War archive, something from the 21st century solar conflicts. She issued a planet-wide order in simplified trade language: evacuate with enemy wreckage as shield, enter atmosphere behind debris, use their fire to cover our escape. Military units scattered across the surface complied. The planetary escape became a reverse invasion, with shuttles darting into holes in the enemy formation, covered by their own debris field. At minute 58, she issued a final directive: send a false distress signal from the city's capital to lure remaining enemies into a nuclear collapse zone she had destabilized in the early phase. They took the bait. The simulation ended at 59 minutes and 44 seconds. Arya stood still, her skin damp with sweat. The silence was deafening. The projection dome retracted slowly, revealing the 6 instructors above her. The Gelthian officer spoke first. His voice was a deep, resonant hum. "You used their corpses as cover." "It worked," she said simply. The Karnak stood, slamming a fist into his own chest. "You sacrificed 2 zones for the safety of 10. That is not indecision. That is war." The Varelian remained silent, her eyes still closed, but her head nodded ever so slightly. Commander Vrel walked toward her, datapad in hand. No cadet, not even the Karnak's war heirs, has ever completed this scenario without total planetary loss. "You are the first," he said. She met his eyes. "Does that mean I pass?" He didn't smile, but there was something new in his expression. Respect. "It means you're no longer a provisional anything," he replied. "Effective immediately, you are a cadet of the Tactical Division. You will receive a personal mentor. You will join simulations with active war strategists, and your performance today will be studied by command academies across the outer reach." The Gelthian added, "And your simulation human will be mandatory curriculum." Arya felt her chest rise with a slow breath. She didn't need applause. She didn't need thanks. What she needed, what she had always wanted, was the chance to prove that what lived in her mind had value beyond strength. As she left the chamber, a few younger cadets passed her in the corridor. One of them, a Tyrothi girl with plum-colored skin, whispered something to her companion, then glanced at Arya with wide, uncertain eyes. By the time Arya reached her new dorm, she found her name already listed on the strategic analysis roster. Her mentor's name was displayed beside it: Lieutenant Commander Sevran Thale, Combat Historian, Battle of Null's Gate. She placed her palm over the biometric scanner, stepped into her new quarters, and finally let the weight of it all settle over her. But this time, it was not a weight of failure or exclusion. It was the weight of command. The training routines ended the moment the emergency signal reached the academy. It came through encrypted military channels, bypassing protocols and demanding immediate council attention. Red pulses lit up across the simulation floors, command halls, and tactical wings. The message bore the distress code only used by Outer Rim colonies under active siege. The source was Varnak Prime. Arya sat at her desk, reading combat logs from previous interspecies conflicts when her slate flared with a high-priority alert. She tapped the notification, and a cold dread crawled across her skin. The details were fragmented, but clear enough. Orbital silence from the entire Varnak system, loss of contact with its planetary command, multiple civilian outposts destroyed within 2 planetary rotations, and an unknown enemy movement pattern disrupting every established defense algorithm. She didn't wait for instructions. She stood, slipped into her uniform, and made her way to the upper command chambers, where high-level personnel were already assembling. By the time she entered, the room was filled with a dense silence, broken only by tactical projections shifting across the walls. Commander Vrel stood at the head of the table, his expression set in granite. Lieutenant Commander Sevran Thale was already present. He glanced at Arya as she entered, his eyes sharp behind a layer of battle fatigue. He motioned her forward without a word. "She stays," he said firmly to the officers who eyed her arrival with surprise. "Cadet status or not, she's the only one here who's beaten 3 unpredictable simulations in a row." No one challenged him. Vrel turned to the central display, bringing up a real-time rendering of Varnak Prime. The planet's atmosphere flickered with unnatural electrical surges. 3 blacked-out regions pulsed in deep red, signifying total loss of contact. Around the planet's orbit, twisted metallic formations drifted like fragmented claws, debris from the defense ring. But that wasn't what unsettled the room. It was the ship signatures. No one recognized them. "They don't match any faction on record," Vrel growled. "No trade routes, no known biosigns, no linguistic attempts. They appeared without warning and adapted instantly to every countermeasure." A Zarneth intelligence officer pointed to a collapsing zone near the planet's equator. This was a fortified sector, 30,000 civilians. It was flattened in under 3 hours. Automated defenses turned against their own shield grid. Thale turned to Arya. "You studied Varnak's original infrastructure, didn't you?" "Yes," she said quickly. "The planetary power grid was decentralized, but the orbital network had access redundancy. That kind of internal sabotage couldn't be done externally unless the system trusts the attacker," she finished for herself. Her mind raced. "It's not just a brute force invasion," she added. "It's infiltration. These attackers must be spoofing identity codes, maybe even mimicking command hierarchies." Vrel narrowed his eyes. "You're suggesting command override without ever physically stepping into a system?" "Yes, but not through traditional hacking, through behavioral mimicry." Thale's voice grew grim. "Like synthetic evolution, intelligence capable of observing a defense pattern, replicating its logic structure, then feeding it back to the system as if it's an internal command." Arya's eyes locked onto the orbital debris fields. "Then every protocol-based response will fail. The more rules we follow, the more predictable our resistance becomes." Vrel moved toward the table's control pad. "We've lost direct contact with ground command, but we have one uplink remaining, automated logistics beacons around the polar region. They're still transmitting. That gives us a window." He pressed several keys. A new display emerged, showing a slowly shrinking shield dome over a mining colony near the northern pole. Inside that dome are 75,000 civilians, including engineers, researchers, and non-combatants. No central command, no reinforcements. If the dome drops, they die. Arya studied the parameters. "We can't land troops. The enemy controls the airspace, but we might be able to project remote directives through the logistics beacons." Thale nodded. "The question is, can someone coordinate a defense remotely without a single living officer on the ground?" Vrel looked at Arya. "You've run our deadliest simulations. Now it's real. No pauses, no resets. We're giving you control of the beacon grid. You'll have the drones. You'll have the emergency protocols. You'll have 30 minutes to establish a defense, or Varnak Prime becomes a funeral moon." The room cleared around her. Engineers configured the uplink. A single console was brought forward, linked directly to the beacon network. The hollow map of the colony emerged, fractured and incomplete, but functional. Civilian positions were tagged in pale blue. Infrastructure lines pulsed in weak green. No military units. She sat. Her fingers hovered over the interface, then began to move. First, she rerouted all mobile power cells from industrial plants into the primary shield emitter. The dome stabilized for now. Then she activated dormant mining equipment and repurposed them as perimeter drones, embedding movement-triggered seismic charges around the base's radius. She turned water supply tunnels into escape corridors and deployed decoy signals simulating high-command broadcasts to bait the enemy's attention away from the core. The enemy responded fast. Unmarked ships changed formation, diving toward the polar colony. Arya altered her patterns instantly. She broadcast a fake surge from a non-functional beacon cluster on the western ridge. The ships veered toward it, only to fly into a wall of kinetic mines she had hidden in the ice. Arya tracked their movement paths. She noticed a strange spiral pattern, always curving clockwise, always adjusting based on atmospheric pressure changes. "They're not aiming to breach the dome," she whispered. "They're trying to force the civilians into abandoning it." She countered with a psychological maneuver. Using internal loudspeakers wired into the base's emergency network, she activated an ancient Earth anthem, Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, loud and unrelenting. The colony had been silent for days, filled only with panic and confusion. The music returned rhythm and confidence. In that chaos, the civilians began to follow her automated directions. Evacuation pods were loaded. Shield matrices shifted position. The mining drones, reprogrammed with brute protocols, detonated in pre-selected sacrifice points, burying enemy scouts under avalanches of fractured ice and rock. With 10 minutes remaining, enemy ships surrounded the dome completely. Direct control became impossible. So she handed the remaining operations over to a predictive cascade algorithm she had built inside the Academy, an unsanctioned side project inspired by ancient Earth strategy games. The system responded with vicious precision. The last wave was neutralized, not with firepower, but with terrain manipulation. Arya melted portions of the polar crust, forcing entire spires of blackened iron to collapse on the landing vectors. Then the transmission cut. Silence. No confirmation. No data. Just the flat gray of a dead feed. She stared at the console, heart hammering. Thale placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll wait for the signal." An hour passed. Then another. Finally, the console blinked green. Civilians. 71,340 survived. Shield. Stable. Enemy retreat confirmed. She exhaled, slumping back into her chair. Across the room, Commander Vrel gave a single nod. "Put her name on the roster," he said. Varnak Prime. Tactical operation. Commanded by Cadet Arya Wells. Outcome. Success. The decision came sooner than expected. 3 days after the defense of Varnak Prime, the Galactic Council summoned Arya to the Central Summit Chamber aboard the Core Spire Station, the rotating diplomatic heart of the Inner Systems. It was a place few ever entered without decades of command experience, and even fewer entered as cadets. Yet her presence was not only requested, it was demanded. She arrived escorted by Lieutenant Commander Severin Thale, whose silence during the shuttle ride said more than any words ever could. He didn't offer encouragement, and he didn't explain what she might expect. He simply watched her with that same unreadable expression he had carried since Varnak. She didn't ask for reassurance. She knew that whatever waited inside that chamber would either elevate her or erase her. When the docking sequence completed, she followed him through the curved glass corridors of the Council's upper ring. Stars shimmered beyond the dome, distant and cold. Below, countless diplomatic vessels pulsed in quiet orbit like fireflies waiting for judgment. The doors to the main chamber opened without sound. She stepped inside. 12 council members sat in a semicircle of raised platforms, each representative of a different starfaring race. Their podiums glowed with faint light, denoting active session. In the center of the chamber floated the symbol, an ancient, weightless sphere that spun without motion, marking whoever stood beneath it as the subject of council judgment. Arya took her place directly beneath it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the Varelian speaker broke the silence. Her voice was melodic and artificially enhanced, her translucent skin catching the light as she leaned forward slightly. "You are the human named Arya Wells." "Yes," she said clearly. "You coordinated a successful defense of Varnak Prime. 71,000 civilians survived because of your decisions. I was given access to the logistics grid. I acted within my limits." The Varelian's eyes narrowed. "Your limits are what concern us." A Karnix counselor growled from the far side of the room. His armor clinked with every small movement. "You defied the hierarchy. You ran unsanctioned protocols. You detonated orbital assets worth 700 million credits without approval." "I neutralized a full fleet without the loss of a single manned vessel," she answered. Another voice joined in, this time from the Altrasi counselor, who spoke in slow, deliberate cadence. "You are not here to debate metrics. You are here because your presence challenges the foundation of this academy, and by extension, our military command structure. No species in our records has risen through tactical ranks without physical qualification, heritage lineage, or sanctioned sponsorship. You had none." Arya kept her stance still. She refused to shrink beneath titles. "And yet, I succeeded." The Altrasi didn't blink, which is exactly why this hearing is held. The chamber lights shifted. A series of holograms flickered to life behind her, showing combat simulations, performance charts, emotional resilience logs, and her unorthodox neural mapping from the Varnak event. None of it followed standard progression. None of it was trained. Severin Thale stepped forward, voice low but firm. You created a contradiction the Council was never prepared to resolve. She beat our best because she didn't learn from us. She learned around us. The Gelthian counselor, ancient and slow-moving, stirred for the first time. Then perhaps the issue is not the contradiction, he said, but the structure that could not account for it. A pause followed. The chamber dimmed as a new hologram emerged, a visual of the enemy fleet over Varnak, frozen mid-frame. Beside it appeared one of Arya's reconstructed tactical overlays, her battle cascade in motion. Council members watched as the enemy formation collapsed under the weight of redirected infrastructure and predictive misdirection. Not a single command was traditional. Not a single weapon was fired from a human hand. She redefined engagement, Thale said. She built a battlefield without stepping onto it. The Karnak's counselor grunted. And if we allow this kind of strategy to become precedent, will others begin to believe that war is an abstraction? That it can be solved from behind screens, without sacrifice? Arya answered before Thale could. No one understands sacrifice better than someone who fights without the tools others take for granted. Her voice did not shake. I had no exoskin, no combat lineage, no augmented physiology. I entered a world where everything was built to make me fail, and I adapted. I studied the way others overlooked the silent spaces between battles. I used them. That's not cowardice. That's evolution. Another counselor, a quiet representative from the Davari species, known for seldom speaking, leaned toward his calm. You believe this academy must evolve? Yes, she replied. Not because I did something no one else could, but because what I did was possible all along. The system just never gave anyone like me a chance to prove it. The symbol above her shifted, glowing brighter. The chamber fell into deliberation. She waited for what felt like hours, standing alone beneath that ancient sphere, her entire future suspended in the gravity of a dozen foreign judgments. Severin remained near the archway, hands behind his back, a silent shield against whatever conclusion would fall. At last, the lights returned. The Varelian stood. The council has reached consensus. Her voice no longer held the melodic detachment of protocol. There was something colder in it now. Effective immediately, Arya Wells of Earth shall be elevated to the rank of strategic commander within the Intergalactic Defense Network. She will be granted authority over simulation design, battlefield development, and emergency response operations in Alliance-controlled space. Her methodologies will be studied, tested, and integrated. Her record will be made public. The Karnak's counselor hissed, but said nothing. The Varelian continued. Let it be known that this council acknowledges the emergence of a new doctrine, one born from human resilience, not brute force. The war has changed, and so must we. The symbol dimmed. It was done. Arya stood beneath the fading light, her heart silent, her limbs motionless. She didn't smile. She didn't weep. There was no ceremony, no grand salute, just the sharp clarity of knowing she had shifted the weight of an entire military civilization with her mind. When she stepped out into the corridor, Severin walked beside her. You rewrote the rulebook, he said quietly. She glanced at him. Number I just read the parts no one else noticed. He didn't argue. The transport took them away from the council ring, through orbit, and back toward the academy grounds. As they descended, she looked out at the massive spires of command towers below, once unreachable, now hers to navigate. By morning, cadets would walk through halls bearing her simulation records. New lectures would begin, lessons not of muscle or velocity, but of foresight, adaptation, and restraint. A month later, the tactical wing renamed its simulation division, the Wells Protocol. The girl who once swept floors beneath the gravity stabilizers now trained commanders who had never known failure. She taught them how to fail intelligently, how to see past the noise of instinct, how to build victory with incomplete maps and impossible odds. And when young cadets asked her what made her different, she never spoke of Varnak or simulations or command codes. She simply said, I listened to silence. That's where the battle starts. And in that silence, a strategist was born, one whose war left no body behind, only changed minds.